Tonight we're going to talk about the sacrament of marriage. I think it's the last of the sacraments that we're going to talk about in class. And tonight we're going to break this presentation up. John put together some wonderful thoughts on the sacramental effects of marriage, kind of like thinking about marriage and what it produces, kind of like almost like theologically, and then I'm going, as someone who has prepared people for marriage for years, to talk a little bit about the ceremony and preparation and what actually the couple is saying I do to, and then Mary is going to be able then, after the two more theoretical angles, to be able to share from her experience some practical things, and we hope that it will be helpful.
Yeah. I'm going to pass these, have you guys just pass these around and take one. So, the sacrament of marriage is one of my favorite things to talk about. And recently, having gone through the prep and having gone through it, my wife and I have been married for 4.5 years now, so we're almost at our 5-year anniversary, which is kind of fun. And with that, I often think back on our marriage prep, and there was things about it that were really good, and there's things about it that I wish would have happened that did not, where it felt that it was lacking in areas. And so Jess and I on our own have done a lot of research on it, and just the more I study it, the more I realize how beautiful this sacrament is and what God had intended it to be. And so that's why I love to talk about it and to share. So before we get to the sacrament itself, again, a sacrament is an outward sign given to us by God to confer grace, to grant grace, to give us grace.
Confer, I think, is the old
word. The word.
Confer. I don't know what confer is. Confer, you gotta confer in your teeth.
I looked up what confer, the definition, and it was like grant or bestow. I'm like, okay, so bestow and confer, we're just about the same thing. But it's an outward sign given us by God to give us grace. What is grace? Grace is, another word for grace is gift. Grace is gifts from God to help us along our journey. And so, the handout that I just gave you is a very theological description of sanctifying grace and actual grace. Two different kinds of grace. I'm going to have Jim throw that slide up. The difference is very simple. Actual grace is basically what it says it is. It's grace that helps us to act. It's the grace that God gives us every day to turn to Him and follow Him. And everybody that exists receives actual grace from God every single day. It's made new for us every day, and that's a direct quote from Scripture. Whether you're Christian or not, that actual grace God gives to us to either go deeper in our relationship with Him or to turn to Him and to have conversion of heart to come to Him, because He desires us to come to Him. So that's actual grace. It's daily grace that's given to us. Sanctifying grace is a little bit different. And I love the definition of it, which is it's a grace that is a state in which God allows us to share in His life and love. It's a state.
There's another angle of this freedom. We believe in the Christian and Catholic Church that when two married people come together in the act of marriage, that's what God uses to make the two one flesh. When they come together, it's probably the closest that people will ever get to God on earth, the theologians say. And we believe that our bodies, with that marital act, the bodies say, I am yours forever. Whether they're married or not, or whether they had just met or not, we believe that there's something ingrained in us that the voo says, I'm yours forever. So logic says that if two people who aren't married officially have been together in that way for a long time, and they've said, I'm yours forever, with their bodies a long time, then they may not be free, to be able to even say no on their wedding day. They've already said yes, and in a way they're already connected. I always like to say, this always sounds like a bad philosophy class. I always tell couples, in order to be free to say yes on your wedding day, you have to be free to say no. No matter how long you've been together, or no matter how much money is down on the down payment of everything, that you need to be able to say, I don't have to do that. That makes sense. You don't have to. And I think that's probably one main reason why the Catholic Church has always taught for people not to live together, but more importantly, not sleep together before marriage, is because they want that dust of that beautiful marital act that often goes woo, 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 right? And brings the two souls together, that you want enough separation right before the marriage to know that you're sober. I'm convinced, after 25 years almost of priesthood, in my own opinion, that one of the main reasons, or a major factor in many divorces with 50% in the country, is that oftentimes 50% people marry the wrong person. And they often think it's the right person, because oftentimes that they are engaging in the marital act before marriage, and that dopamine is so powerful, and they are so broken that seems so much in love for them, that they really think they're in love, but if that dust settles, they can really see, oh, we're not a good fit. No, my opinion, no judgment, but just, so that's why I always encourage couples through the church's teaching and engagement time to sleep separately, to let that dust settle, so they can do everything they can in the engagement to say, yeah, I know I'm marrying the right person. And then just pray for that. And then they can enjoy that powerful, healing, sanctifying grace bringing, gifts, of marriage. So that's freedom. And our freedom from anything that hinders us from celebrating the rite of matrimony. We've all known people, oftentimes people who struggle with addiction, who freeze their emotions. Sometimes when people are really sensitive to pain, or they are got things to work through that they have no idea how to, oftentimes people keep themselves drunk, high, busy, or something, because they have no idea how to deal with their pain. But you know what happens when you freeze your emotions? It's not just the bad ones, is it? And you freeze everything. And oftentimes, people like that have a hard time being able to enter into the sacrament of marriage, because they are so frozen and, that they're not able to give and receive love. Do you know what I mean? So that's an example of something that would hinder someone from celebrating the rite. So I always tell couples, I say, both of you need to know on your wedding day that you are relatively emotionally healthy, and so is your partner, that you are able to give and receive love. So those things, freedom to marry, and freedom from anything that hinders you, that's before the marriage. So what are they saying? What are you promised to do? Lifelong and faithful. Well, that seems obvious. Lifelong means that you jump off the cliff together, you trust you're marrying the right person, there is no backing out, and you just know that you guys together will figure it out, and that God has chosen this person for you, so that just by working through all of the darkness and skeletons that will come up from your subconscious and in your life, that the two of you together have the tools to work it out, and that you're promising they stay in the ring with one another. You all know the beginning of relationships. It's kind of like the beginning of a pastorate. The first 3 years is where everybody hates the pastor, because you're just, and the people who aren't vibrating there go out, right? It's the same thing with a relationship. You hang in there for one another, and I'm not losing and ever leaving you. Then over time, you work that out. Faithful. well, in our country, the moment you say being unfaithful, the first thing is that, well, my partner, my spouse slept with somebody else. And certainly, being unfaithful sexually is part of being faithful and unfaithful. But it's not the only thing. I think we believe that marriages is that this person is going to be your number one source of God, ideally in your life. And so, after 15 years of marriage, if you're spending more energy and time at your job, or with your kids' sports, or helping out at church, or with your family of origin, your parents, and taking care, and you're seeking it there, in a way, you could say, emotionally, that you're not true to that faithfulness. A union which is open to children. Just the way God made us, that every act of love is always open to children, because before artificial birth control, there was something about the fact that there was always a possibility of procreation that kept sexuality in a marriage and in society in a proper balance. It was harder to use, I always think I put this on Buzz. It's much easier when there's no chance of children to be able for people to use one another and to use that something that's sacred in a way that isn't ultimately respectful and connected to God. So that's why the church has always said every act of love open to children. And even though, with natural family planning or even after someone can no longer have children, it's not always there. But the idea is love is not just for the two people, it's always open to new life. A union which is modeled after and symbolizes God's ever faithful love for his people. Your spouse cannot make you happy. But what they can do is remind you how much God loves you. And that's what you're to do. You can't make each other happy, but you can walk together and try to be able to love one another and to be God with skin on. I think every human being, because we're in a human body, always doubts if we're lovable or loved by anybody. But I think in marriage, one of the things your spouse does by never leaving you and try every day to love you is that they love you no matter what, and that they symbolize the love that God has for both of you. It's this partnership of life and love we seek in marriage, to which we publicly give our consent. So that's just, I think you see there's a lot of things in there, isn't there? About what we believe that marriage is. And that's ideal, but that's kind of the understanding. So the goal of a marriage is what God has joined, no one must separate. But the reality is, I in my years have never really seen a couple that didn't try their best to make it work. But there are some times that marriages end in divorce. And that's because sometimes, as I stated earlier, I think people literally marry the wrong person. And the church believes that what God has joined, no one must separate. So when you marry the right person, and that bond in God forms, you can never leave that. Because eventually, if you marry the right person, you guys are going to work it out, and God's going to use that person and each other to be able to bring it together. But there's sometimes that the bond doesn't form. That's why we go back to something is blocking that grace. And so, it is possible through the church to be able to present some information, and the church can say, we recognize that at the time of your marriage, there was something blocking that grace, and that bond never formed. And so that bond in God that you asked for was null and void from the beginning. Unfortunately, the English word for that is annulment, which is the same word that if you go to the justice of the peace the day after you made your wedding vows, when you were both drunk and you didn't mean it, you know, and you say, like Britney Spears did 20 years ago, remember that? You know, and so, but what do they call that? Annulment. And this is the word, if I want to just proclaim to the world that when you get a church annulment, it doesn't mean that they weren't married. And it doesn't mean that the children are legitimate. It has nothing to do with those people and those things. It has everything to do with the fact that the people who are divorced and want to be remarried already know in their heart that as hard as they tried, there wasn't an everlasting bond in God in that previous relationship, but they really feel that there is one here in this new relationship that they want to grow. So that's my 2 cents, you know, about, or $2 and 2,000, 2 million, 22, whatever, that I have. And just to, John talks about sanctifying grace. My favorite definition of grace is the transforming, healing Spirit of God, you know, but it's all about God's Spirit. So that's kind of what I have, and we've asked Mary to be able to speak on kind of the application and the, so it's 7:55. Do we want Mary to go now?
Yeah.
That would be great. Mary was going to share some of her personal experience, you know, with marriage, and those things to flesh it out in a real way. Your turn.
Do I have to come up there?
Yes.
You better hurt my neck. Yeah, that would probably do it. Wow. Well, if I had do-overs, but life isn't full of do-overs, is it?
Mary, go ahead and take your mask off. I'll move.
No,
So that everyone's far away.
okay. These are a blessing and a curse, you know, all at the same time. Basically, listening to Father talk. It's not what I planned to do. My first marriage, I married a friend, my friend. And, we had a lot of the same goals, we were a lot the same. And, again, I think, in listening to all of this tonight, we talked about a lot of things. And, it just made sense. I think we dated for a couple years, and, some of the numbers escape me now, but, the wedding was planned, of course, the fun part. And everything seemed fine. What I realized too late was that I had kind of loaned him or given away my values. I knew what I wanted, I knew what I believed. He had said that he, the same thing, although it wasn't the same. And it took me a while to realize that there are some things that happen. People change, like it or not. Not everyone that gets married is in their 20s and thinks the world is just going to be what they want it to be. But I was one of those people, and after all, I was a preacher's kid, and so I thought I had all these extra graces too. You know, God wouldn't let me get married. No, He wouldn't. He wouldn't do this. He would watch over me. We had 3 children, and we had 3 kids in 5 years too, but not the way you did. We spread them out a little bit.
Yeah, we're 2.5 years.
And he was a wonderful father. There were a lot of good qualities that still admire today, although he's not with us today. But at the same time, you know, I kind of had this feeling something was changing, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And, but nothing ever came up in conversation, and I was busy with the kids, and as you talked earlier about the kids and schools and all this stuff, parents become very involved, and it's usually the mom. The parent is the one that wants to do stuff with the kids because they're home more. But this was back in the 70s. So, I thought things were going well. He was in business for himself, things were going well. I had temporarily retired from nursing, and out of the clear blue, I heard 4 little ugly words that I will always remember. I want a divorce. I just went numb. What? And with that, he said, yeah, well, we'll talk later, and out he went. He said he had a meeting. Well, to say that my life was shattered doesn't even describe it. Because I have these 3 children, and when you have children, it's wonderful, but they're also a big cause for concern. What happened then was that after I came to the realization that this was going to be, he refused to obviously he did not want to be married anymore. He did not want to. Counseling was reserved for like pastors and things. Well, unfortunately, my pastor was very biased, so there was no way he was going to. And I know. So we had arranged for some family counseling. Actually, some was mandated by the court that we had to do this, and I was all for whatever. Well, he refused to go. He said he had nothing to say. He wanted out of the marriage, and after a while, it was all my fault anyway. So that never happened. And they never pressured him to do it. So, and why do it? You have to want to do something. So I resolved that I was going to live through this because I had to for my children. The thing about kids and divorce is that they hear things, they know things, but you know, the thing is, we never argued. There was never anything that they could have, that in retrospect, I was trying to think, how did they, and they didn't really know that anything was wrong, and neither did I, so we're all in the same boat. And how could that happen? You tell me, because I don't know, I lived it. So, when it came time that he was going to move out of the house, we tried to arrange it so that the kids would not be home. And all my kids were involved in sport, you name it, and we were big into swimming at the time. And my daughter was a swimmer and a diver, and they were at St. Francis pool diving, and they had early meets. And I had arranged that the mother that was picking them up would take her home with them. Well, the night he came to take all of his things out of the house, the kids were all gone except for one problem. The swim team got out early. When I saw the car pulling the right away, and my daughter jumped out of the car, "Hey, Mom!" And out he goes with some of his stuff. Well, that didn't turn out well. So eventually what happened was, after he was out of the house and that was all, you know, dealing with the other woman, the kids, when I would come home from work, I was working part-time at a urgent care center, and I could get home about 11 something. And invariably, I had a really good babysitter. She just lived across the street, and that was wonderful, just wonderful. And she'd known my children since, well, they were like In fact, one was born while she grew up with them. And so, but when I would get home, there would be at least one child in the big bed, in our big bed. And I finally, one of my kids was very talkative, and I knew which one to go to. And I said, why are you guys, what's going on here? Why are you in mommy's bed? He says, we want to make sure that you're coming home. Wow. So, I sat down and I talked with them, and what I explained to them was that their father loved them. It was me he didn't love anymore. And I could not explain that. Why didn't Dad? I can't explain that. But I've told them a story about, if you have a person that's in your class at school and you want them to be your friend, and you're inviting them to your house, and you're giving them candy bars or something. I mean, you do everything you can to make them want to be your friend or to do stuff with you, invite them over or whatever. But it doesn't matter everything that you do that you think is right. If they want to be your friend, they will be, regardless of all the things you're doing. But if they don't want to be your friend, no matter what you do, they're not going to come to like your birthday party or whatever. You cannot make someone else love you. So, the kids, that's, in the past now, they're all adults and they were able to understand totally what happened. Well, then fast forward, in fact, when I came to start my annulment, it was very embarrassing because I didn't know the priest. I didn't know, I was so green, I had no idea. I thought it was the most wonderful and horrible experience at the same time, because it made me re-look at all the past and in my own mind, I knew that this was a marriage that I planned forever. But my ex-husband didn't. And that was the big problem with, you can't make something happen. You can't, I would have rather, really in the long run, it was good that he did leave and stay gone, because if he would have come back, it would have been a facade. It would have been something that wouldn't have worked. And his father said, it was the wrong person. It was the wrong person. So, the annulment was really a very healthy thing to do, because number one, it validated that I was right about a lot of things, and that the people that I had to have a witness, you have to have kind of witnesses that can validate a little bit of what you're saying. They knew things that I didn't even know, and I was like, okay. So I had a lot of support, and after that, he was not a very present father, even in the divorce. He wasn't much of a father. But every once in a while, he'd show up and be the hero, with taking him out to dinner or something like that. But it was nothing that ever, you could tell that it was just not there. So, after the annulment was cleared, I think I told you this in one of the groups, that when we filed for the annulment, it takes months to do it. In fact, it takes longer than you think it's going to take, because there's just a lot of pieces to it. Father was telling me today about just, getting the witnesses to get their statements back. So if you're ever doing one, which we're not going to do, their input is very important, but it has to be done in a timely fashion. And fortunately, mine all were. So, when it was Father Metzger was here during that time, and it was in January, and we were going to be going through in April, Easter, and he came up to me one day and said, "Hey Mary, guess what I got in the mail today?" And I said, "What?" "I got the first approval." And it was like, okay, don't I need two? Well, yeah, but this is good enough for me. Wow. The second approval came through, and it came to me rather than to the church. And when I opened it, I read the date on it, and I couldn't believe it. My annulment, after all those years, well, 12 years of marriage, all that years, all that time, my annulment for that marriage was granted 25 years to the day I was married. You can't make that up. And that was like God sounding me, yes, yes, yes. Well, fast forward, again, I have these good friends that thought that I've just been single too long. And no, I haven't. I've been, no. Well, eventually, when you approach marriage the second time around at a different age, and the wisdom and the life experience, and you've been drugged around enough, you're not going to be real anxious to jump in again. So I had a mutual friend who kept trying to introduce me to this gentleman, and I put her off like 3 times. And the thing is, she said, Mary, she said, you know who this is, and she gave me his name, but it didn't really make any sense to me. Well, he's a pharmacist. He said, and you're a nurse. You guys don't get along real well. I said, you think that makes, oh yeah, right. No, I said, well, so to make a long story short, after multiple times I finally said, okay. And she said, well, you know, Mary, he just lived across the street from me, so if you don't like him, you can just walk home. And I thought, okay. So as it turns out, it was a widower who had 3 children, and he had a girl and 2 boys, as did I. But also, it wasn't just a marriage of 2 people anymore. It was a marriage of 2 families. And that plays a whole different role when you're going into so 5 years later, we're still dating, and we're still talking, and by now, they call us the Brady Bunch every time I go out to eat, because there's, and the kids got to know each other really well. And that just seemed like it was really, and finally, we were sitting in the parking lot at a Kroger one night, and Bill says, what are we gonna do with this? What are we gonna do? And we decided, well, you know what? I guess. He says, oh, you wanna get married? I said, well, I guess. And we did. We put it together, and it was 34 years. One marriage was broken from infidelity. The other marriage got kind of broken a little bit with health. He passed away at about 6 days after his 81st birthday. He was sick for a long time. He was sicker than he knew, but I felt that nobody could take care of him. Yes, I have an ego when it comes to nursing. Nobody could take care of him better than I could. And it wasn't until about 6 days, well, maybe a week before he died, we had hospice come in, and I had a little bit of help taking care of him just for certain times of churning and whatnot. But, and Bill had already experienced a traumatic death with his wife, who died of cervical cancer when he was in her mid to late 30s, leaving him with children to raise. And I told him when we talked about marriage, I said, wait a minute. I'm this divorced person. You are this Catholic whose wife has died. You are free to marry. I'm an impediment to that. And he said, no, you're not. He said, we'll get married anywhere. And I said, well, okay. But after we were married in the Lutheran church. But after the annulment went through, after that was all behind me, we had a time when we started talking about further on down the line, and what to do about church, because he had several friends who had passed away rather quickly. And it dawned on me that I should, I said to him, well, Bill, if something should happen to you, what should I do? Who should I call? Preface this by knowing that he was born and raised Catholic in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. He was the altar boy, he was all those things. But his first wife didn't want the kids involved with any church, didn't want him involved with any church, and so he would sneak to OL once in a while, but he never was really able, as that person, to practice his faith. So, I didn't know what, I said, well, who should I call? Call a priest. Did not take a breath, and I thought, okay. And that's when I started my journey to the church, unbeknownst to him. And he called St. Pat's and made an appointment to come over. And at the same time, I was talking to a priest that I knew at the hospital about how to do this and what should I do and whatnot. And he was it was just amazing. And then I couldn't believe it because he didn't tell me he was doing this. He didn't know what I was doing. So again, I feel so blessed. I would not, had I not gone through all that hell, the first part of my first marriage, I would never be here. And I can only tell you, from what I wish I knew then what I know now. But it was a very happy second marriage, made up for all the stuff from the first marriage. And the kids, well, we didn't have any stepkids, we had bonus kids. And
That's awesome.
today, the children are, I call them children, but they're all so close. They're in town, out of state, and they keep in contact with each other, and you can't make that up. And I asked one of my boys about it, and he said, Mom, you guys showed us how to do this. That was pain enough.
And when it did come time, when he was dying, and when she had to call a priest, she could call me, who had known Bill for 25, 30 years through the Magic Club. It was just all came around. That is just wild that I knew him. We've been friends for years.
Anyway, there is life after enrollment, and if Bill hadn't come into my life, I would have been very happy to be single for the rest of my life. But that was worthwhile. So anyway, thank you. Don't be afraid if it happens, and it will. Sometimes it seems like it takes longer than you want it to, but we've got nothing but time. And hopefully you guys never have to go through it.
Thank you for sharing that, Mary. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So instead of taking a quick break, if it's okay, we'll just open it up for a quick time of questions with Father on anything that we've just talked about, whether it's the sacrament itself,
Do people
annulments.
got or are people okay?
If you need to use the restroom, just go run for it. But yeah, Father, if we want to.
Can you tell them?